This is the Midwest of America. In the last 40 years, the heartland of the US watched its factories disappear overseas. Labor is cheaper, taxes are lower, making production cost more viable elsewhere. But right now, billions of dollars are flowing back. New factories, new plants, new investment pouring into states like Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Illinois. In a small town called Seymour, with a population of about 20,000, a company called Guardian Bikes built a factory and turned $11 million in revenue to $140 million in 3 years. They're making bikes in America, at a scale this country hadn't seen in decades. This proves it works. But why did production leave in the first place? And why suddenly the Midwest is at the center of a manufacturing push nobody saw coming? The Midwest used to be the industrial engine of the country: steel mills in Ohio and Pennsylvania, auto plants in Michigan, part suppliers and tool shops spread across Indiana and Illinois. These weren't scattered operations, they were clustered together. Raw materials came in from one direction, finished goods went out the other. Everything stayed near, running in close proximity. Then the world changed. In the 1980s, globalization opened up new trade routes. NAFTA shifted production towards Mexico in the 90s, and in 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. That's when the floor fell out. In the late 70s, nearly 20 million Americans worked in manufacturing, accounting for 22% of the entire non-farm workforce. Today, it's around 12.9 million, roughly 8%. That's a loss of nearly 7 million jobs over 4 decades. And it wasn't just the big factories that closed. When the plants left, everything around them went too. The parts makers, the tooling shops, the logistics networks. The specialized knowledge that kept it all running. Entire ecosystems that took generations to build came apart in less than one. That's the hole tariffs are now being asked to fill. Tariffs aren't some new invention. Alexander Hamilton used them in the early days to protect young American industries from being crushed by cheaper British goods. The idea was always the same: give a domestic industry enough breathing room to grow, get stronger, and eventually compete on its own, training wheel, not a permanent wall. And this is where Guardian Bikes gets interesting. Tariffs on importing bike parts shifted the math. In some cases, domestic components became cheaper than Chinese imports. That's the tariff promise, doing exactly what it's supposed to do. A company that could barely stay afloat in 2022 was on pace for $140 million by 2025, nearly 90% of the components made on site in Seymour, Indiana. But getting there wasn't clean. Guardian had to automate heavily because the labor math didn't work any other way. The average American manufacturing worker earns about $30 an hour. In China, the fully loaded cost is around $6.7. That's more than 4 times cheaper to build the same thing overseas. Guardian lost money in the early days, and because the domestic supply chain for bicycles has been gone for decades, they had to convince companies making completely different products to start building bike parts again. They didn't just reopen a factory, they rebuilt an entire supply network from scratch. Tariffs changed the math for Guardian Bikes, but Guardian is one company making one product in one Indiana town. Their product allows them to use automation to close the cost gap, and they have a CEO willing to lose money for years while the pieces came together. The question is whether that math holds when you stretch it across the entire economy, because what worked in Seymour doesn't automatically work everywhere else. Tariffs can work. Guardian Bikes proved that, but they can also do the opposite, and no company learned that harder in 2025 than Ford. On December the 23rd, the White House told Ford that a tariff relief credit on imported auto parts would only count back to November. Ford had been planning all year as if it would count back to May. That 6-month gap added $900 million in costs that Ford didn't see coming. The total tariff bill for 2025 hit $2 billion. And that same quarter, Ford posted an $11.1 billion loss, the biggest quarterly loss in the company's history. Here's why this happens. A car doesn't get built in one place. Parts move back and forth across borders between the US, Mexico, and Canada multiple times before a finished vehicle rolls off the line. Every border crossing adds tariff costs, and those costs land on the American company doing the assembling. It gets worse. For years, automakers were told to go electric. The government backed it with tax credits. Ford went all in. Then the current administration shifted direction. Ford ended up taking a $19.5 billion charge tied partly to unwinding that EV push. Years of investment reversed by a policy change. And there's the other side of the tariff wall. Chinese automaker BYD can sell electric vehicles for roughly $10,000 to $25,000 less than comparable American models. A 100% tariff keeps those cars out of the US market. In 2025, BYD outsold Tesla globally for the first time. That tariff wall keeps Chinese EVs off American roads, but it also keeps cheaper options away from American buyers. Every time you buy a car in the US, part of what you're paying is the cost of that production. There's a bigger promise underneath all of this, and it's not just about factories, it's about jobs. Politicians' pitch is that manufacturing is the path back to solid middle-class work. Good pay, stable hours, the kind of employment that build the Midwest. But here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Right now, there are roughly 439,000 open manufacturing positions across the country. Factories that exist today cannot find enough people to fill the roles they already have. And by 2030, that gap could grow to 2.1 million unfilled jobs. Part of the reason is the salary. A production worker on a factory floor earns about $29 to $30 an hour. The average private sector worker across all industries earns more. Most people assume factory work pays better than average. It doesn't. And the economy itself has moved on. More than 70% of American non-farm workers are now in service industries: healthcare, tech, retail, finance. The country became a services economy decades ago, and the workforce shifted with it. Then there's the part that changes the whole conversation. Most economists agree that automation, not trade deals, wiped out the majority of manufacturing jobs. And the factories coming back today are more automated than the ones that left. Guardian Bikes uses robotic welding systems and laser cutting machines. That's how they keep costs down. But every robot on that production line is a job that didn't get created. The tension is simple. The only way to make American manufacturing cost competitive is through heavy automation. But automation means fewer workers. The political pitch says more jobs. The economic reality says more machines, and those two things are pulling in opposite directions. Now, imagine jobs weren't an issue. Let's say tariffs worked and companies really brought manufacturing back. Well, there's a deeper problem that might cripple everything. A factory doesn't run on its own. It needs suppliers, parts makers, raw materials, specialized tooling, logistics, an entire network of companies feeding into it every day. And for most industries in this country, that network has been gone for years. One toy manufacturer spent an entire decade trying to find domestic production capacity at the volumes they needed. 10 years of searching, and never found it. And the gap isn't just about missing suppliers, it's about how far behind the US has fallen in building them. In 2019, China spent an estimated $248 billion on industrial policy, training workers, funding research, building out factory infrastructure. The US spent $84 billion. China's R&D tax benefits alone grew at nearly 29% a year between 2018 and 2022. That's not a gap you close with a tariff. That's decades of compounding investment. You can see what happens when the gap meets reality. In June 2024, a Swiss company called Meyerberger opened a solar panel factory in Arizona. They had government incentives behind them from the Inflation Reduction Act, brand new facility, real production. Less than a year later, the factory shut down. 282 workers lost their jobs. The company couldn't keep up with the cheaper solar panels coming out of Asia. Their German operations filed for insolvency shortly after. On top of all this, American factories carry costs foreign competitors don't. US manufacturers pay about $29,000 per employee just to meet federal regulations. That's nearly double the average across all industries. And those regulations exist for real reasons. Clean air, safe working conditions. Nobody's arguing they shouldn't be there. But they add weight, and they make it harder to compete with countries that don't play by the same rules. So, bringing a factory back without rebuilding the supplier ecosystem around it isn't really manufacturing, it's the final assembly. The product might carry a Made in America label, but most of the value that went into making it was created somewhere else. The special thing about the Midwest is the interstate system, one of the densest freight networks on the planet, all running through the same region. From central Indiana to Ohio, you can reach a third of North America's population in a single day's drive. Land costs a fraction of what it costs on the coast, operating expenses are lower, and the workforce still carries generations of industrial knowledge that never completely disappeared. Guardian bike numbers are showing real results. Intel has committed nearly $30 billion to a semiconductor complex outside Columbus, Ohio. Stellantis pledged $13 billion to expand production across 4 Midwest and Rust Belt states. But Intel's plant won't be up and running until 2030 at the earliest. It was supposed to open years ago. Right now, there are about 800 workers on a site that was planned for 7,000. Stellantis isn't expected to start building new vehicles until 2027. The money has been promised, the factories haven't delivered yet, and there's a big difference between the two. Manufacturing is heading back to the Heartland, some of it slowly, under very specific conditions. Whether that turns into something bigger depends on answers that no single tariff can provide. The Midwest was built for this. The highways are still there, the location still makes sense, the foundation hasn't crumbled completely, but the world around it has changed, and the manufacturing that's coming back looks nothing like the manufacturing that left. Fewer workers, more machines, longer timelines, higher stakes. The real question was never whether factories could return to the Midwest. It's whether what comes back matches what was promised.